The prison escape that should have been impossible. The prison sirens screamed through the night. Red lights flashed across the gray walls of Blackridge State Prison. Guards ran through the hallways. Metal doors slammed shut one after another. Someone had escaped. That alone was shocking. But what happened next made no sense at all. The escaped prisoner was named Daniel Brooks. Just 10 minutes earlier, 3 guards had seen him inside his locked cell. Security cameras showed him sitting quietly on his bed. The steel door was locked. The bars were untouched. The small window was sealed. There was no tunnel. There was no broken lock. There was no sign of a fight. Yet Daniel Brooks was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The prison was built to hold the most dangerous criminals in the state. Experts called it impossible to escape from. Former prison officers often joked that even a fly would struggle to get out. But now one prisoner had somehow disappeared. Then a guard searching the prison yard found something that made his blood run cold. A prison uniform. Daniel's prison uniform. Folded neatly beside the outer security fence. The same fence that carried enough electricity to stop anyone from climbing it. The guard slowly looked beyond the fence. Fresh footprints stretched into the darkness. Daniel Brooks had somehow crossed every wall, every camera, every locked gate, and every guard. But how? And where was he going? No one knew. What they were about to discover would become one of the strangest prison escape cases in American history. To understand what happened, we have to go back 6 months earlier. Back to the day Daniel Brooks first arrived at Blackridge State Prison. The prison sat alone on a rocky hill far from any city. Tall fences surrounded it. Watchtowers stood at every corner. Armed officers watched every movement day and night. Most prisoners feared Blackridge. Daniel did not. When the prison bus stopped outside the front gate, the other prisoners looked nervous. Daniel simply stared at the building. His face showed no fear. Officer Mark Harris noticed it immediately. Mark had worked at Blackridge for 15 years. He knew how prisoners acted when they arrived. Some were angry. Some were scared. Some pretended to be tough. Daniel was different. He looked calm. Too calm. As the prisoners entered the processing area, Mark watched Daniel carefully. "You understand where you are?" Mark asked. Daniel smiled slightly. "Of course. You won't find a way out of here." Daniel looked directly into Mark's eyes. "Maybe not today." The answer bothered Mark. For the next several weeks, Daniel caused no problems. He followed prison rules. He attended meals. He worked in the library. He never argued with anyone. Most guards eventually stopped paying attention to him. But Mark did not. Something felt wrong. Daniel spent hours reading books. Not novels. Not magazines. He read books about prison construction, engineering, electrical systems, and building layouts. Every chance he got, he studied. Sometimes he even sketched small diagrams on scraps of paper. When officers approached, he quickly hid them. One rainy afternoon, Mark searched Daniel's cell during a routine inspection. He expected to find nothing. Instead, he found dozens of tiny pencil marks hidden beneath the metal bed frame. Lines. Numbers. Measurements. Distances. Someone had carefully recorded information. Mark stared at the markings. His stomach tightened. Daniel wasn't passing time. He was planning something. That night, Mark filed a report. Most supervisors dismissed it. "He's just bored," one said. "He's harmless," said another. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling. Then, 3 days later, something happened that proved Daniel was hiding a secret. A maintenance worker entered an unused storage room beneath cell block C. The room had been locked for years. Nobody ever went there. When the worker opened the door, he froze. The dusty floor was covered with fresh footprints. And in the center of the room sat a hand-drawn map of Blackridge State Prison. The map showed details no prisoner should ever know. But in one corner was something even more frightening. A red circle. And beside it were 4 words written in pencil. "The way out exists." Officer Mark Harris stared at the message, realizing someone inside the prison had discovered something everyone believed was impossible. And at that exact moment, somewhere deep inside Blackridge, Daniel Brooks was smiling. Officer Mark Harris could not stop staring at the message. "The way out exists." The words seemed to hang in the air. The storage room was silent except for the sound of rain hitting the building outside. Mark carefully picked up the map. Every hallway was marked. Every security checkpoint was labeled. Even some maintenance areas appeared on the drawing. Whoever made it knew Blackridge State Prison far better than any prisoner should. Mark immediately carried the map to the prison warden. Warden Robert Collins listened carefully as Mark explained everything. The hidden measurements. The books Daniel had been reading. The strange diagrams. And now the map. For a moment, the warden looked concerned. Then he leaned back in his chair. "It still doesn't prove he's planning an escape," Collins said. Mark frowned. "Sir, this prison wasn't built yesterday. Every prison has weaknesses." The warden shook his head. "Not this one." Mark left the office feeling frustrated. The prison administration believed Blackridge was perfect. Mark knew better. Anything built by people could have flaws. Meanwhile, Daniel Brooks continued his daily routine. Every morning he woke up at the same time. Every afternoon he worked in the prison library. Every evening he returned quietly to his cell. Nothing about him seemed suspicious. Yet the more normal he appeared, the more nervous Mark became. One afternoon, Mark walked into the library unexpectedly. Several prisoners were reading books. Others were writing letters. Daniel sat alone at a table. A large engineering book lay open before him. When Daniel noticed Mark approaching, he calmly closed the book. "What are you studying?" Mark asked. Daniel smiled. "Just reading." "Reading what?" "History." Mark looked at the title. It was definitely not history. Before he could say anything else, Daniel stood and walked away. The smile never left his face. That night, Mark reviewed security footage from the previous month. Hour after hour passed. Most recordings showed nothing unusual. Then he noticed something strange. Every few days, Daniel would briefly disappear from camera view for less than a minute. It always happened near the laundry area. The blind spot was small. Most guards would never notice. But Daniel seemed to know exactly where it was. Mark replayed the footage again and again. His heart started beating faster. The blind spot should not exist. The prison's cameras were supposed to cover every angle. The next morning, Mark inspected the laundry area himself. At first, everything appeared normal. Then he found something hidden behind an old maintenance cabinet. Tiny scratches. Fresh scratches. The marks looked deliberate. As if someone had been moving the cabinet repeatedly. Mark pulled it aside. Behind it sat a metal access panel built into the wall. The panel was locked. But the lock showed signs of wear. Someone had been tampering with it. Mark immediately called for maintenance records. Hours later, the records arrived. What he found shocked him. The access panel led to an old utility passage. The passage had been sealed years earlier during prison renovations. Most staff members didn't even know it existed. Mark's hands tightened around the file. This was exactly the kind of weakness Daniel would search for. For the first time, Mark felt certain. Daniel was planning an escape. He rushed to inform the warden. This time, Collins took the warning seriously. Additional guards were assigned to watch Daniel. His cell was searched again. His belongings were examined. But nothing suspicious was found. No tools. No maps. No plans. Nothing. Weeks passed. Then months. Life inside Blackridge slowly returned to normal. The extra surveillance continued, but Daniel never made a mistake. Eventually, even Mark began wondering if he had been wrong. Maybe Daniel was simply intelligent. Maybe all the clues meant nothing. Then came the storm. The largest storm of the year slammed into the region. Heavy rain pounded the prison. Strong winds howled across the hill. Thunder shook the buildings. Power flickered several times throughout the night. Emergency systems activated exactly as designed. The prison remained secure. Or so everyone believed. Around midnight, a security alarm suddenly sounded inside the control room. Operators rushed to their screens. One camera had gone offline. Then another. And another. Within seconds, 6 cameras stopped working. The room erupted into chaos. Technicians scrambled to identify the problem. Mark arrived moments later. His stomach dropped when he saw the locations. Every failed camera surrounded cell block C, Daniel's cell block. Mark sprinted through the prison corridors. Rain hammered against the windows. Lightning flashed outside. The emergency lights painted the hallways in eerie red shadows. When Mark finally reached cell block C, several guards were already there. The prisoners appeared asleep. Everything seemed normal. Then one officer pointed toward Daniel's cell. The steel door remained locked. The bars were untouched. But something was terribly wrong. Daniel was standing inside the cell, smiling, holding a small piece of paper. As Mark approached, Daniel slowly pressed the paper against the bars. Written across it were 6 chilling words. "You're looking in the wrong place." Before Mark could react, a deafening explosion echoed somewhere deep beneath the prison. The explosion shook the entire prison. Lights flickered. Dust fell from the ceiling. Alarms instantly erupted throughout Blackridge State Prison. For a moment, nobody moved. Then officers began running in every direction. "What was that?" one guard shouted. "I don't know," another yelled. Officer Mark Harris stared at Daniel Brooks. Daniel remained inside his locked cell. Calm. Silent. Smiling. Mark grabbed the paper from the bars. "What's happening?" he demanded. Daniel simply shrugged. "You tell me." Mark wanted answers, but there was no time. The explosion had come from somewhere beneath the prison. He rushed toward the lower maintenance levels with several officers. The hallways were packed with emergency personnel. Everyone was trying to figure out what had happened. When Mark reached the underground level, he found maintenance workers already gathering near a damaged utility room. Smoke drifted through the corridor. The blast had not been large enough to destroy the structure, but it had caused serious confusion. Engineers quickly inspected the area. A few minutes later, they made an unexpected discovery. The explosion had been caused by an overloaded electrical box. Nothing more. No tunnel. No escape attempt. No major damage. Just a malfunction. The prison administration breathed a sigh of relief. The emergency slowly came under control. But Mark was not relieved. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Back in cell block C, Daniel sat quietly on his bed, still smiling. The timing was too perfect. The cameras failed. The explosion happened. And Daniel somehow knew about it. Mark could not stop thinking about the message. "You're looking in the wrong place." What did it mean? The next morning, Mark reviewed every report from the previous night. Most officers believed the incident was over. Mark disagreed. He began checking security logs, camera records, maintenance schedules, staff movements. Hour after hour passed. Then he noticed something strange. During the confusion caused by the explosion, one prison employee had briefly entered a restricted records office. The employee was a maintenance worker named Ethan Reed. The visit lasted less than 2 minutes. At first it seemed unimportant, but Ethan's job gave him no reason to be there. Mark decided to speak with him. When Ethan arrived, he looked nervous. Sweat covered his forehead. His hands shook slightly. "Why were you in the records office?" Mark asked. Ethan swallowed hard. "I got lost." "You've worked here for 8 years." Ethan said nothing. Mark leaned forward. "What were you looking for?" Again, silence. The interview ended with no answers. But Mark became convinced that Ethan was hiding something. Over the next few days, Mark quietly watched him. The more he watched, the stranger things became. Ethan often looked over his shoulder. He frequently checked his phone. Sometimes he disappeared into areas of the prison where he had no work assignments. Then one evening, Mark followed him. Keeping his distance, he watched Ethan leave the main building after his shift. Instead of driving home, Ethan stopped at a small diner outside town. He entered alone. A few minutes later, another man walked inside. Mark couldn't see his face clearly. The two men sat together. They talked for nearly an hour. Then they left through separate exits. The meeting seemed secretive, almost planned. The next day, Mark obtained security footage from the diner's parking lot. As he watched the video, his pulse quickened. The second man was not a stranger. It was Daniel Brooks' younger brother, Ryan. Mark immediately informed the warden. This time, even Warden Collins looked concerned. Now there was evidence connecting someone inside the prison to someone outside. An investigation officially began. Ethan Reed was questioned again. His house was searched. His financial records were examined. The investigators soon discovered something alarming. Over the past 6 months, thousands of dollars had been secretly deposited into Ethan's bank account. Money he could not explain. Money that appeared shortly after Daniel arrived at Blackridge. The evidence was growing. But there was still one problem. Nobody knew what Ethan had actually done. Days later, investigators finally uncovered another clue. Inside Ethan's garage sat several boxes filled with old prison blueprints. Some were decades old. Some had been discarded years earlier. Among them was a blueprint showing an underground utility network beneath Blackridge. A network most staff members had forgotten existed. Mark spread the drawings across a table. His eyes moved from one page to another. Then he froze. There it was. A narrow service route running beneath multiple prison buildings. The route ended near the outer perimeter. Years ago it had supposedly been sealed forever. But the blueprint showed something else. A section had never been fully documented. A hidden connection. A missing piece. Suddenly Daniel's behavior made sense. The books. The measurements. The maps. The utility passage. The cameras. Everything pointed toward the same thing. Daniel wasn't trying to break through the prison. He was trying to go underneath it. Mark immediately assembled a search team. That night they entered the abandoned utility passage beneath cell block C. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Dust covered the floor. The air smelled old and damp. The passage stretched deep underground. For several minutes they found nothing. Then one officer stopped suddenly. His flashlight revealed fresh footprints in the dirt. Dozens of them. Recent. Very recent. The team followed the tracks deeper into the darkness. The tunnel twisted beneath the prison. Every step increased Mark's fear. Finally they reached a steel door at the far end. The door stood slightly open. Someone had been there. Recently. Mark slowly pushed it wider. His flashlight beam swept across the room beyond. And what he saw made his heart nearly stop. The chamber was filled with tools, maps, supplies, and enough equipment to support a massive escape operation. But the most frightening discovery was hanging on the wall. A detailed countdown calendar. Only one date was circled. Tomorrow. Mark Harris stared at the calendar. Tomorrow. The word seemed to echo inside his head. 4 months, Daniel Brooks had been planning something. Now the deadline was only 1 day away. The hidden chamber was quickly secured. Investigators flooded into the underground room. Every item was photographed and examined. The walls were covered with notes. Maps hung from hooks. Measurements were written everywhere. Someone had spent months building this secret operation. Yet one thing immediately stood out. There was no escape route. No tunnel leading outside. No secret exit. Nothing. It made no sense. If Daniel planned to escape tomorrow, where was the final piece? Mark carefully studied every map. Every note. Every drawing. Hours passed. The deeper he looked, the stranger everything became. Most of the plans focused on one thing. Timing. Not digging. Not breaking locks. Timing. Daniel had recorded guard schedules. Maintenance schedules. Shift changes. Camera inspections. Power system tests. Everything revolved around precise moments. It was as if he wasn't planning to force his way out. He was planning to slip through a crack that already existed. Somewhere. The next morning, Blackridge State Prison entered full lockdown. Extra guards filled every hallway. Additional officers arrived from nearby facilities. Every prisoner was searched. Every cell was inspected. Every entrance and exit was monitored. No one was taking chances. Daniel Brooks remained inside his cell, calm as ever. When officers searched his cell yet again, they found nothing unusual. No tools. No maps. No hidden messages. Nothing. The hours slowly passed. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became evening. The prison remained secure. Some staff members began to relax. Maybe the lockdown had worked. Maybe Daniel's plan had been stopped. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Just before sunset, he reviewed one final report. It contained information about the prison's electrical systems. Most of it looked routine. Then one detail caught his attention. His eyes widened. Years earlier, Blackridge had installed a backup security network. The system automatically activated during emergencies. Most staff knew about it, but very few understood exactly how it worked. The report revealed something surprising. For exactly 90 seconds during a major system transfer, security control briefly shifted between networks. 90 seconds. A tiny gap. A tiny moment. Almost impossible to notice. Mark suddenly understood. Daniel wasn't escaping through a hole. He was escaping through a weakness in the prison's procedures. A weakness hidden inside the system itself. Mark immediately rushed to the control room. Technicians confirmed his fears. A major power transfer test was scheduled for that night. The exact night circled on Daniel's calendar. The exact night of the planned escape. Orders were given to cancel the test immediately. But a new problem appeared. The transfer process had already begun. Stopping it halfway could shut down critical prison systems. Engineers warned it could create even bigger security risks. The prison administration faced an impossible choice: continue the process, or risk widespread system failure. Meanwhile, Daniel remained locked inside his cell, watching, waiting. As darkness settled over Blackridge, tension filled every corridor. Officers stood at their posts. Control rooms remained fully staffed. Every available guard was on alert. At exactly 11:58 p.m., the transfer sequence began. Technicians monitored every screen. Everything appeared normal. 11:59 p.m. 1 minute remained. Mark stood inside the control room. His eyes never left the monitors. Then midnight arrived. The transfer activated. For 90 seconds, control shifted between security systems. Nothing happened. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. Everything looked normal. Some officers began breathing easier. Maybe they had been wrong. Maybe Daniel had failed. Then a technician suddenly shouted, "Camera 12 is offline." Another voice followed, "Camera 14 too." Then another. And 17. Screens across the control room went black. Alarms erupted. Officers scrambled to respond. Mark's heart pounded. This was it. This was the moment. Security teams rushed toward cell block C. When they arrived, Daniel's cell appeared unchanged. The steel door remained locked. The bars were untouched. The surveillance camera pointed directly at him. Daniel sat quietly on his bed, exactly where he should be. For a brief moment, everyone felt relief. Then one officer looked closer. The prisoner sitting on the bed wasn't moving. Not even slightly. The officer stepped forward. A terrible realization hit him. It wasn't Daniel. It was a life-sized figure made from blankets, clothing, and carefully folded towels. Daniel Brooks was gone. Panic exploded throughout the prison. Search teams flooded every hallway. Doors slammed shut. Emergency procedures activated. Yet Daniel remained nowhere to be found. The 90-second window closed. The cameras returned. The systems stabilized. But it was already too late. Mark raced toward the underground utility passage. Something told him the answer was there. When he reached the hidden chamber, he immediately noticed something different. One wall had been moved. Behind it stood a narrow opening nobody had discovered before. A passage. Small. Hidden. Ancient. Mark shined his flashlight inside. Fresh footprints disappeared into the darkness. The escape route had been hiding in plain sight all along. Without hesitation, Mark and his team entered the passage. The tunnel twisted beneath the prison for hundreds of feet. Finally, it ended at a rusted metal hatch. The hatch stood open. Cool night air drifted inside. Mark climbed through. He emerged beyond the prison's outer fence. Beyond the walls. Beyond the watchtowers. Beyond every security system Blackridge possessed. Daniel Brooks had actually done it. He had escaped the prison that everyone believed was impossible to escape from. But as Mark examined the ground outside the hatch, he discovered something that changed everything. Fresh tire tracks led away from the scene, and beside them lay a small note addressed directly to him. Mark unfolded it with trembling hands. The message contained only 7 words. This was never the real plan. And suddenly Mark realized the escape was only the beginning. Mark Harris stared at the note. This was never the real plan. The cool night wind blew across the empty field outside Blackridge State Prison. Daniel Brooks had escaped. That much was clear. But the note suggested something even more troubling. The escape itself was not the final goal. It was only part of a larger plan. Mark immediately ordered investigators to follow the tire tracks. The tracks led to a nearby road before disappearing into regular traffic. There were no cameras in the area. No witnesses. No useful clues. Daniel seemed to have vanished. Again. The following morning, news of the escape spread across the state. Reporters gathered outside the prison. Experts appeared on television. Everyone asked the same question. How could a prisoner escape from Blackridge? Inside the prison, investigators continued searching through Daniel's hidden chamber. They examined every note and every map. Most of it focused on the escape. But one notebook contained something different. It listed names, dates, locations, and strange symbols. Mark spent hours studying the pages. Eventually, he discovered a pattern. The names belonged to former prisoners. Many had already completed their sentences and left prison years earlier. At first, the connection made no sense. Then investigators started contacting them. One by one, they learned something surprising. Several former prisoners had recently received anonymous letters. The letters contained simple instructions. Wait. Be ready. Watch the news. Nobody knew who had sent them. But Mark had a strong suspicion. Daniel Brooks. Days passed. Then weeks. The search continued. Law enforcement agencies across the country joined the investigation. Every lead was followed. Every tip was checked. Still, Daniel remained missing. Some people began to believe he would never be found. Then everything changed. One evening, Mark received an urgent phone call. A former prisoner named Tyler Evans wanted to speak. Tyler sounded nervous. Very nervous. He claimed he had finally understood one of the letters. Mark drove to meet him immediately. Tyler handed over an envelope. Inside was a message. Only a few sentences long. Mark read it carefully. Then he read it again. His eyes widened. The message revealed the truth. Daniel's real goal had never been money. It had never been revenge. It had never been violence. For years, Daniel had been obsessed with proving something. He wanted to prove that Blackridge State Prison was not perfect. Years earlier, Daniel's older brother had died inside the prison after a medical emergency. An investigation later found that several safety procedures inside the prison needed improvement. Daniel became consumed by one idea. If he could expose every weakness in the system, people would finally pay attention. That obsession eventually turned into a criminal plan. He spent years studying prisons. Years studying systems. Years preparing. His escape was designed to embarrass Blackridge and expose flaws that officials had ignored. It was dangerous. It was illegal. And it had worked. The entire state was now examining prison procedures. Security experts were reviewing every weakness Daniel had uncovered. The more they investigated, the more flaws they found. Daniel had been right about one thing. The prison was not perfect. But his decision to escape had created enormous risks and forced a massive law enforcement operation. Months later, investigators finally received a breakthrough. A small-town police officer several states away recognized a man living under a false identity. The fingerprints matched. It was Daniel Brooks. Authorities moved quickly. This time, there was no dramatic chase. No escape. No mystery. Daniel surrendered peacefully. When officers arrested him, he reportedly smiled. Almost the same smile Mark remembered from Blackridge. A few months later, Mark attended part of the court proceedings. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every seat. The judge listened to the evidence carefully. Daniel admitted what he had done. He admitted planning the escape. He admitted using hidden passages, timing gaps, and help from corrupt employees. He also explained why. Many people disagreed with his reasoning. Others believed some of his concerns deserved attention. But everyone agreed on one thing. Breaking the law was not the answer. The judge sentenced Daniel for his crimes. His escape had become one of the most famous prison cases in recent memory. After the trial ended, Mark left the courthouse. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. Blackridge State Prison underwent major improvements. Security systems were upgraded. Procedures were rewritten. Blind spots were eliminated. The hidden passageways were permanently sealed. Years later, people still talked about the case. Books were written. Documentaries were made. Experts studied every detail. And the story always came back to the same question. How did one prisoner escape from a prison everyone believed was impossible to escape? The answer was surprisingly simple. He didn't defeat the walls. He didn't break the bars. He didn't overpower the guards. He found weaknesses that nobody else had bothered to see. And for one brief night, those weaknesses opened a door that should never have existed. A door that allowed a prisoner to accomplish what everyone thought was impossible. The prison escape that should have been impossible. And that is why the case of Daniel Brooks remains one of the most unforgettable crime stories ever told.